A documentary film has been released this week that contemplates the impact of killer robots in an increasingly automated world, one where machines make decisions over who to kill or what to destroy. Automated decisions are being introduced across all parts of society, from pre-programmed bias to data protection and privacy concerns. There are real limitations to these algorithms, especially when that same autonomy is applied to weapons systems. The documentary premiered on the 24th of May, and here are some of the thoughts of people who attended the screening in London in the UK.
What I loved most about the film was the very human reactions that everybody was having, and as time went on, they became more and more human.
I think it raises a lot of really important issues, the way it looks at bias in technology and automating violence. I think we really need to think about these issues and how we want to use technology for humanity.
I just watched some more code, and it definitely made me think more about me as an individual in society.
Right now it's making me think about how I interact with technology. I'm a fan of technology, but I never thought that technology can be used as a deadly weapon.
I thought the film was brilliant. I thought it was incredibly powerful and just showing how much of an urgent situation it is.
Absolutely brilliant.
Well, to tell us a little bit more about the use of automated weapons in war, I'm now joined by Dr. Thompson Chengeta, who's an international law expert who serves as a legal expert member of the International Panel on the Regulation of Autonomous Weapons, and he also serves as an international law expert for the International Committee for Robots Arms Control. He provides legal expertise to the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots and a number of African states on disarmament issues. Dr. Chengeta, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. Good evening.
All right, this Campaign to Stop Killer Robots released a film called The Immoral Code, and it recently premiered in London. You're a spokesperson of the campaign, Stop Killer Robots, and also one of the experts that appear on this particular documentary film. Tell us a little bit about what you're referring to as Immoral Code.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that question. The reason why the documentary is titled Immoral Code is because currently, Peter, we are in a situation where a number of states, a number of scientists are developing a number of artificial intelligence technologies, coding a number of algorithms that apply or that are used in our day-to-day lives. But there are some which are good and there are some which are bad. The ones which we are referring to as immoral code in this particular documentary film are those that do not necessarily save humanity. When I'm saying save humanity, in other words, they're bad for humanity, what others may refer to as artificial intelligence for bad. These are circumstances where, for example, particularly when we're zoning in on the use of force, where governments or certain industries are developing weapon systems that are able to make decisions, for example, when to use force against which persons and with what severity without any human control, what others call autonomous weapon systems or killer robots. We say this is immoral, or this is an immoral code, because we are saying that it is against not only ethics, but legal standards that are relevant, for example, to the protection of the right to life. On the African continent, for example, we always have this, African ethic, which we call the spirit of Ubuntu. And the African states, on various occasions, actually have been able to actually categorically state that allowing machines the power, over life and death is something that is inconsistent with this spirit of Ubuntu. It is along those particular lines that we say, whosoever develops or programs this kind of codes are developing what we're calling an immoral code. It's immoral, it's against the ethics, it's against the codes that are supposed to govern humanity, so to say.
So are autonomous weapons already in wide use?
The general, it's a yes or no question. The no question is that the bigger states that are particularly, developing these particular weapons, the likes of United States, Israel, etc., have not openly said that they've developed these kinds of weapons. But you would note that in 2021, for example, in Libya, there was a UN report which actually reported that an autonomous weapon system was actually deployed in Libya. Very sad, because it was deployed first of all in African continent. 2 years or 3 years ago, when we're discussing about these issues of killer robots, people thought, it is something that is maybe in the near future or far future, like, when can this ever be deployed? But with the current, progresses that are happening in the Silicon Valley, in the United States, as far as this development of these particular weapons are concerned, we are already, they are no longer on the horizon. We are facing them the question also, of course, then, is what are the nations of this particular world, what are people going to do in regards to this particular technology?
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the dangers. I think you've given us some clues, but what are some of the dangers posed by killer robots, autonomous weapon systems? Is there some advantage? There must be pros and cons.
I would say that when you hear the debates about autonomous weapon systems or killer robots, particularly within the United Nations, you hear as if it is, a balanced argument, or where you have pros and cons, as you so refer. But for me, when I critically look at what people refer as to the possible advantages of the uses of autonomous weapon systems or killer robots, they really can't stand any scrutiny. I'll give some examples. Starting with the most dangers that are presented as far as the use of autonomy in weapon systems is concerned is this idea where we say that as far as capacity is concerned, the use of force, be it in armed conflict, be it in law enforcement, we say that machines can never have that capability to have situational awareness, to understand to the last dot what human behavior is like, for them to be able to comply with the laws that govern war, for example, which is international humanitarian law, or those laws that govern the use of force in the context of law enforcement. That's the first question, to say they won't be able to be able to comply with these complex laws that govern the use of force. That's the first danger and challenge. The second issue is where we say even if they were to be able to comply with these complex laws, the second question is, should they do it? This is more of an ethical question, where you were asking, when you consider the right to human dignity, which many scholars, many scientists argue to say, when it comes to the decision as to who should die or live, that decision should always be left to human beings. It should be human beings who make that particular decision as to who dies or lives. These are some of the challenges with this autonomous weapon systems pose. The third main point, if I may, Peter, is an issue of accountability, where we say in the event of these systems violating laws that govern war or laws that govern law enforcement, if they commit war crimes, if they massacre individuals in a law enforcement situation, who becomes accountable? There becomes what we call an accountability gap. By an accountability gap, we say as lawyers, for you to be able to prosecute someone, for you to be able to convict someone in a court of law, you not only have to prove, number one, that there was a wrongful conduct, but you also have to prove what we call mens rea, a guilty mind, that a person intended to commit that crime. But now, if this system have got autonomy in deciding what they can do once they're activated without the control of a human being who activated them, you may never be able to prove mens rea, which leads to this, which we'll call accountability gap. Now, Peter, you say, could there be any advantages? Others say, now, look at how war is at the moment. If you look in Africa, if you look at how human soldiers are faring at the moment, surely it's terrible. So these systems, if they are used, number one, they may not commit crimes that humans usually commit. Number two, we may save also our own soldiers. But responding to this particular argument is to say, number one, first of all, the argument that they may save lives because they don't act out of emotions, etc., is to assume that these particular machines can be able to make value judgments, which I referred to, which they can never be able to make. Number two, it is to make the most fundamental error of seeing autonomous weapon systems as what I call neutral technology, as a technology that can be owned or produced by any state. It's not correct. There are certain states, there are certain individuals, there's a certain race that is producing these particular weapons. There are certain peoples who will be at the receiving end, and unfortunately, it is those people who have been historically at the receiving end when these weapons are deployed. The people of color, the people in the Muslim world. So all what we are talking about here is perhaps an extension of what I call racial oppression or religious oppression.
All right, as a legal expert, do you think that there's enough laws to govern the development and the use of killer robots or autonomous weapon systems?
I, as an international humanitarian law expert, I love international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict. I love human rights. But I do not necessarily think that there is sufficient law to govern this particular technology. Never before have we been faced with machines that are able to make decisions, in other words, to replace the human being and make the decisions as to the use of force. This is a new phenomenon. If you look at the human rights regime, when we're talking about who has got the obligations, to implement human rights, the contemplation of the drafters of all human rights treaties, they had a human being in mind. If you look at international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, those who drafted those laws, they contemplated that the person who always make the decision to use force is a human being. This is a different situation. We are now entering an era which I would refer to as uncharted territory, where humans are now being actually, or can be potentially be replaced by machines. In that regard, there is insufficient law, Peter, to govern these autonomous weapon systems. This is the reason why at the UN currently, the campaign to stop killer robots, and many states, over 30 of them now, over 5,000 scientists are calling for a new legally binding instrument to govern the use of autonomous weapon systems. Number one, to ban the use of autonomous weapon systems without any human control. Number two, to introduce this principle, which we say maintaining the concept of meaningful human control over the use of force.
All right, perhaps as a final question, and if you can be brief, should Africa be paying attention? Should we be concerned about this debate around the immoral code?
Definitely, Africa should be worried, as I've already highlighted that, when these technologies are being produced, the question, or the fundamental question we should always ask, is in which regions will this be deployed? And Africa, unfortunately, will be one of the continents or peoples on the receiving end. I must say that I'm actually really, to some extent, happy that Africans are also beginning to contemplate or study the issues relating to the use of autonomous weapon systems or artificial intelligence technologies that may cross that moral code which we have as a society. You may recall that I think in 2021, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights passed Resolution 473, of course, spearheaded by the able chairperson of the African Commission, Dr. Solomon Deso, which is the first resolution on artificial intelligence and human rights on the African continent. And currently, there is this study on artificial intelligence and human rights on African continent that's being also spearheaded by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in collaboration with the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, led by Hlengiwe Dube, and many other individuals across the continent who are actually working around this particular issue of how artificial intelligence technologies should be regulated on the African continent and also at the global level.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. Dr. Chengeta, thank you very much indeed for joining us and always talking about these important issues. And let's hope that our politicians, policymakers, lawmakers pay attention and do something about it. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much, Peter.